We're at the Graphite Mine near Porter Corners, town of Greenfield, Saratoga County. And the story behind the Graphite Mine and Mill, in the late 1800s, a young boy and his playmate were accompanying their father in this area, and they went to a local spring to get water, and they found some glittery material in the bottom of the spring. And they didn't say anything much about it that day, but that little boy went on to grow up and moved to New York City and became a businessman, and he never forgot that glitter in the material at the bottom of the spring. So he suspected that it might be some kind of a mineable ore, so he brought some geologists back with him when he was a young man, and they took a sample of the material and analyzed it and found it to be high-grade graphite ore. Today is July 27th, 2013, and I'm Ron Feulner, Town of Greenfield historian, and I'm on this hike today with Bob Jones, professor at Skidmore College. We're now at what I believe is the southwest corner of the ruins, and this was the engine room. This was where all the power came from to run the entire mill, the processing mill. And if you look behind me at this area here, this was actually the location, we believe, of the boilers for the steam engine. The smokestack for the steam engine, if you look at this center area in the rear, that looks something like an old-fashioned fireplace. On top of that was a very tall, I believe it was a steel smokestack that went up 30 or 40 feet, I would guess. And then if we move over into this area, this is a concrete pad, and there are some very large bolts here. I believe this was the location of the steam engine itself. And over in this section we have a pit about 40 inches wide and maybe 15 feet long. And this was the position of the flywheel. There was a very large flywheel that ran in this pit. And the purpose of the flywheel was that I believe the steam engine was a single cylinder engine, so it just gave one power stroke, and it would be a fairly lengthy time before the second power stroke came. And if you're trying to run a mill with that, everything would speed up and then slow down. To make it a consistent speed, they add a huge wheel made out of iron with a lot of mass to it. And as that gets turning, it tends to even out the power of the steam engine. It also acted as the drive wheel for the flat belt that ran all of the machines up above in the mill proper. So coming off this flywheel right here and stretching up through that opening in the back would have been a very wide, probably 25 to 30 inches wide flat belt. And some people who visited this site soon after it went out of business said that you could walk that flat belt up into the mill, and it was almost like walking on a bouncing sidewalk. We'll move now up into another section, and I can describe what would have been there. There would have been several large main line shafts that would have run across the mill proper as we climb further up the mountainside here, and they would have all been run by the large flat belt that I described coming off the flywheel in the engine room. So that belt would have progressed up that side and turned the main line shaft that went across Then they could have put many smaller pulleys off that to run individual machines. So the progress here of processing the ore would come in way up in the back, and it would be run through a series of crushers, crushing it to smaller and smaller sizes until it was fine sand. And then that material would have gone in big tubs that were filled with water. These tubs were called buttles, and they had a brush that kept the water moving inside the tub. These tubs would have been maybe 15 feet in diameter and 4 foot high or so. And the purpose was that the raw ore came in the middle and was washed out toward the perimeter of the circle. And that meant that the heavier materials would sink soon after entering, and the finer and finer materials, the less massive materials, which was the pure graphite, would settle out near the outside of the circular tub. And that's how they separated the graphite ore from the ground up rock, which was worthless. This whole program moved from the higher elevation in the back down toward the lower elevation where we are, and as we approach this area, we would be looking at the processed ore. And down in this area, it would be dried and bagged, ready for shipment. We're still in the lower end of the main mill where the finished graphite would have been dried and ready, bagged and ready for shipment. And when they closed the mill, they didn't even bother to take all of the bags of graphite out of the mill. So some of them, some of the cotton canvas bags were still here filled with product ready for shipment. And through the years since that time, those bags have rotted, and the graphite has mixed with leaves and other debris on the mill floor here. And it's hard to find anything that looks very pure now. But if you look in this area right around here, you can see the sparkle. And that sparkle is the graphite flakes. And it's all mixed with organic material now. But if you'll notice on my fingers, I've got that same black that like graphite drawing pencil. You can see the sparkly material on my fingers and the blackened substance, and that is the graphite. So as we dig down in here a little bit, you can see more of that sparkling material. And that's the product. It was used, as I said, for making steel crucibles. It was also used. It was also mixed in paint with paint. It was used for a number of different things. It's also used as a grease-like lubricant, and it's much better than grease because it will withstand high temperatures. So they use it in place of grease, where it has to withstand high temperatures in machines. And regular grease would have a tendency to break down and run out of the gears. We are now, I believe, northwest of the mill by maybe 50 yards, 50 to 100 yards, and this is the location of the mine, or the series of mine shafts. Now, the literature describes 2 or 3 mine shafts, and I've only been able to find one actual opening into the rock. My suspicion is that back behind me here, you see a little rectangular opening, and it's kind of laid up with stone on one side. My guess is that somewhere in this vicinity was one mine shaft. But I have nothing further, no form of further proof for that other than the shape of the surface here. Now we're maybe 50 feet further along the ledge from the previous location, and this actually is the only mine shaft that we actually know was a mine shaft. I have been inside a little ways, but the entire area is flooded. There have been others in the past who have been inside further and with waders on. I would not recommend it because the literature tells us that this shaft went back horizontally for a short distance and then abruptly went down at a 45-degree angle much deeper. And it would be a terrible tragedy if someone were wandering in the water inside and happened to slip into that area. This shaft didn't look like this when they were mining here because a previous owner hired a piece of heavy equipment to come in and cover this opening up. But Mother Nature has uncovered, Mother Nature and other individuals have come along and uncovered a portion of it so that you can crawl inside. And when you enter here, there's a fairly large room, and then I believe the main shaft, the mining shaft, would drop down 45-degree angle from that point. Now, directly in that direction, there's you won't be able to see it here, but there's the other side of this little creek bed and a steep slope, and up on top of that slope is a concrete pad with some heavy-duty bolts sticking out of it, and we believe that that's where they had a steam engine and a cable assembly that would have reached down into this mine shaft and hauled mining cars loaded with ore up out of the mine. The ore would have then been transferred to another mining car and followed a set of narrow gauge railroad tracks 100 yards or so downslope to the actual mill that we were in earlier, and dumped into the crusher at that point. We are now at the uppermost end of the mill. The mine shaft that we were just looking at is directly in that direction behind the camera, and the ore, the raw ore as it was brought out of the mine, would have come down along a narrow gauge rail system with mining cars. It was probably just about level, so my guess is that men may have even been able to push the cars along the level, and they would come to this point and be dumped in. Now, we are at the highest point in the mill ruins here, and this would be the entry point for the raw ore. And from here, my guess is that the crushers would have been located right in this vicinity someplace. The initial crushers, the ore was run through a series of crushers until each one making the ore finer and finer before it went into the water separation bottles. Now this is a close-up view of the place where the ore entered the mill, and as you can see, there's a substantial slope. The concrete mill was actually built up the slope so that they could use gravity to move the ore from this location where it initially entered the mill and move it downhill under the influence of gravity as it was ground up and then separated into the pure form of graphite that could be shipped. When the mill first opened, they pretty much employed local help, local farmers and woodcutters. Of course, they needed a lot of cutters because a steam engine burns a lot of wood, and according to early stories, the whole side of the mountain here was lumbered off for wood to keep those steam engines running. But initially, as I said, they hired local farmers and local woodcutters to mine the ore and work in the mill. But that didn't work out well because they all had obligations at home. So when the crops were ready to harvest, they'd want to take time off. And when the snow trails were good in the winter, the woodcutters wanted to cut wood and get it out as quickly as they could. So according to local historians, eventually they decided to hire miners from Pennsylvania. And these miners were brought here, and back behind the camera location here, down near the creek, they built a bunkhouse and a kitchen so that the miners could stay. They had two separate buildings because back in those days, cooking with old-fashioned stoves, you could often have the danger of fire, and they didn't want that right in the place where the miners were sleeping. So they had two separate buildings. One was the mess hall where they cooked and fed the workers, and the others were filled with bunk beds where the miners could sleep at night. We have talked about how they processed the ore inside the mill, and the finished product came out at the lower end ready for shipment. And that finished product was taken in cotton canvas bags to the railroad station which is on Route 9N now. Today we call it King's Station, or Station at King's. But what we haven't talked about is what happened to the material the waste rock that was ground up fine, and that was carried out of the mill, and local historians say that initially it was just dumped right into the local stream here. And according again to local history, farmers downstream from this location started complaining that their cows wouldn't drink out of the stream, and they apparently complained enough so that the mill authorities decided to do something about it. So they devised an early environmental plan. They actually took the waste rock, which is again ground up like a fine sand, washed it out of the mill, and if we walk over in this direction a little ways, down in this general direction behind me, they created a series of small ponds, and they would wash the waste rock and water into that pond and let some of the waste settle at that location. Then it would wash over into the second pond, more of it would settle, etc. And eventually they even took it further and took it down to a large swamp area that is maybe a quarter of a mile back in this direction, and let it just spread out on the surface in this very flat swamp. And the water would then filter through the swamp soils, and by the time it entered the streams draining the swamp, it was fairly pure water again. So they apparently solved the environmental problem to the satisfaction at least of the local farmers. I doubt very seriously if it would get by the environmental agencies of today.